Okay, so the next bit of the non-metallic effects go on the barrel that Krampus is carrying all his victims around in, and this is going to use a slightly different technique to get the non-metallic effect. So I'm going to demonstrate that on this flat surface, on this base first, just to show you how that works before I do that on the model. So this is a technique referred to as wet blending, and it's just a little bit more involved than the feathering technique, and it might take a little bit of practice. But the fundamentals are simple. So I've already done this greatcoat grey. So if I was going to be shading this, I'm just going to come in with some black and paint that across there. Now, to get the fade on that, clean the brush off. I want it damp. And then what we do is, starting here, we're going to push into the black, backwards and forwards. You see it's kind of cleaning it off the surface. But then the next bit is we pull it back out. And then as we pull that back out, that separates the pigment and gives us a smooth transition. Now, over a smaller area or a larger area, you just repeat that process backwards and forwards until you've got that pigment to fade out. So that's how we're going to be attempting the shadows. And then when it comes to the highlights, same process. I'm just going to grab some white, add that to my greatcoat grey. A little bit of water in there. Don't want this too watery, otherwise it will dry too quickly. So about 50-50. And then the same again, if I paint that on this side. So that's going to be our highlight colour there. And then same again, clean the brush off, dampen it, and then we're going to push into that colour and then pull back out. And then as we pull back out, once again, that pigment will separate, and that will give us a smooth blend. So that's the rough technique that we're going to use, and I'll be doing that around the barrel on Krampus there. So let's start with the shadows. So I'm going to come in with that black. Now, saying before, I'm going to be aiming my light source from about 2 o'clock. So there's going to be a horizontal bar of light, a vertical bar of light there. So next to that, we want deep shadow. So I'm just going to put some of that black in the recess there. And the same goes down into that recess right there. Not going to worry about the ornamentation because I'm going to come and pick that back out with gold again later. But now we've got that black in there. Come back, dampen the brush. Fade in. And then pull back out again. Keep your brush damp. That'll avoid any scratchiness. Now, same again, the paint's dry there. I'm just going to grab a bit of grey, mix that in with the black, and then push in. And then fade that out. As we look at it from this side, once again, just tidy that little bit up there. I say it's quite a rough and ready technique, but the more you play with it, the faster and the smoother your blends get. And there we have it. Pretty much seamless transition from the shadows to the base coat there. So that's the first stage. So we've started to create that three-dimensional effect there. So what we're going to do now is come in with our highlight colour. So we're going to go back to that greatcoat grey and white mix that we were using earlier on. So it's about 50% white, 50% greatcoat grey. I'm going to add just a little spot of grey in there, just so the jump's not too big. And this is where your confidence comes in, because we're going to paint a really big bar of bright colours that's going to look awful. And then as soon as we start blending that in, it's going to look ace. So we're looking at about 2 o'clock, so I tend to paint quite a big chunk in first, so that I know where the rest of it's going. Now here we've got an angle, and the light's going to follow that as well. So if we just follow the curve, like so, it will look just right. Because as we know, light travels in straight lines, it doesn't go around corners and stuff. So that's our first vertical bar. So that's blocked in there, so that's quite shocking. But as soon as we bring a bit of greatcoat grey back into that, so same again, I'm going to start here, going to fade into that edge there. I say under these lights it's dried a little bit, that's not a problem, so we keep working at it. And then back out again. And the more times you repeat this process with your highlight colours as well as your shades, you'll start to see those real transitionless blends. So we go back in with that 50-50 mix, work in, and then pull back out. Now we've got a bit of an issue here, just a little bit. So where the paint's sort of part dry and part wet, what we've got there is a little bald spot. This is where I've lifted the paint off. So the best thing to do with that is let it dry, and then you can come back in and put another layer over the top that will just cover that up. But for the moment, I'm going to work on the highlight here. Now, because this is a smaller area, I'm just going to place the highlight inside the last colour, just like if you were layering. Just going to feather out that edge. So we're starting to see that light bar. Now it's a bit messy at the moment, but as we repeat that process each time, we get a little bit crisper, a little bit cleaner. So that's covered that bald spot that we had there, and then we just feather that out. There you go. You see a moment when that blend just happens. That's the time to leave it alone and move on to the next bit. So just blend that backwards and forwards until we're happy. Okay, so now we've finished the blending work on the metallics. What we need to do is add a little bit more contrast, and to do that I'm just going to put in some light spots. So where we've got this blend here of the light bouncing off the barrel, I'm just going to come in with some white on the edges and just suggest a reflection. So to do that, we're just going to grab the white, little spot of the grey that we've been using previously with it. I'm going to water this down quite a bit, so about 60-40 on the side of the water. Now we don't want too much on the brush because this is going to be quite subtle, but following this line, just going to dot in where that light effect would be. It doesn't need to be 100% straight. As you notice, I'm going back over it. Every time I go back over that, that reflection gets a little bit more intense. Now around the edges here, this is just a normal edge highlight, so using the side of the brush rather than the tip, just to run that white around the edge there. Same again, couple of passes, and that will really start to glint. Now if you mess up with this stage, don't worry, you can always glaze it back down with your base coat as that starts to thicken up. get that reflective surface. So that's starting to come together lovely. So I'm going to follow that light bead along the top here, so just make sure that lines up. Again, that just gives that shine. And then it's a steady hand and good depth perception required. Now I've made a little bit of a slip there, but while it's still wet, just damp that up and rub that off. Now start adding a little bit more intensity to these light blooms. Now they're dry, the second layer will really start to build. If you keep it a bit jiggly, it kind of suggests there's imperfections in the metal. That's looking pretty groovy. And then the last thing to do is just add a little bit of separation between the panels where light would bounce off of the gold that's going to go on here and back onto the steel. So to do that, a white highlight in between the two parts, pretty much next to where the gold's going to go. Same again if you slip, just damp the brush off, feather away those mistakes and pull the pigment round to finish off. And then as we cross over there, that line gets a little more intense as well. That adds a bit more separation to the panels, and we'll repeat that at the bottom. Now the other thing that this white highlight does is it conveniently draws your eye away from the blending. So the eye is pulled to the white area, which will kind of cause the background to fade out automatically anyway. So it's a nice little visual trick to play with. And then I'm just going to finish that light bar off down the bottom. And that is our metallic effects done there. Now, while I've been waiting for some of the other things to dry, you may have noticed the gun, shoes, some of the armor there, any of the other metallic areas have been treated the same way as the chains. So base coat, highlight with the greatcoat grey and white, then wash down, and then ready for a final edge highlight. And that's that bit done.